during the latter part of Solomon's life, after he had gone through many, many different experiences. Solomon was one of the wealthiest men in history. He was one of the most intellectual men in history. And this afforded him the freedom and the opportunity to experiment with things in life. And after his period of experimentation, to be able to write about them. Now, I think these kinds of observations are very, very helpful. A couple of weeks ago, when we took a couple of days to go down and visit the Blakeleys in South Carolina, it's called McCormick. Some think it's Heaven, South Carolina. But it's wonderful sunshine and very beautiful down there. Along the way, I wanted to stop with my family and show them the Biltmore Mansion. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the Biltmore Mansion. Diana and I visited there years ago when Dan was just a toddler. And at that point, you could drive into the main house. You could see the outside. You could see the gardens. And I just wanted to go and to show the children what kind of mansion I was anticipating in heaven. I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of it, but it's absolutely phenomenal. 200, 300 plus rooms. Kind of a French style, absolutely gorgeous, beautiful. And what is so interesting about this, built in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they put in indoor swimming pool, indoor plumbing, indoor heating, special kinds of electricity, and the entire thing is a bit of a museum. And it was a bit of a hobby in building it. I mean, thousands upon thousands of craftsmen imported from throughout the world to build this marvelous mansion. Well, unfortunately today they caught on to some of our tour techniques, and they have a gate that's about 5 miles from the house where you can't get past the gate until you buy your ticket. So all I could show the children was a model of it and a film of it, and we'll go see it someday after I hit the lottery and get my first payment or two. I mean, it's a little bit expensive to get in there, but what I wanted to simply show was an object lesson of how absolutely magnificent and beautiful this structure is, and I, it was just a summer home. It wasn't, sometimes in the summer, sometimes in the winter, but it wasn't the year-round home. But of these 300 and plus rooms, at one time, only 3 people permanently lived there at one time. Mr. and Mrs. Vanderbilt and their daughter. Now, there were lots of guests. There were many, many elaborate parties. There were, the hound hunting on the horses, and there was all kinds of equestrian events, and they had all kinds of things that they would do, and it was a marvelous kind of party place to retreat and have a good time. And they entertained people and royalty and political figures from all around the world. And I remember touring it and looking through this thing and just saying to myself, boy, wouldn't this be a fun place to live? I don't know if you've ever had a chance to go out to Meadowbrook and see some of the old Dodge homes that were there for the Dodge family. I mean, just magnificent, beautiful oak wood doors, hidden passageways throughout the building and the house where you could hide and move. And in fact, many of the rooms had hidden passageways in case somebody were to enter the home and burglarize it or try to take them captive and kidnap them. They'd be able to hide themselves in these little shelters in the different rooms and not be able to be found. But, I mean, just elaborate games and passageways and rooms. And, after I'd toured that, I could understand why Dodge boys have more fun. I mean, God, why not? But what was interesting to me as I looked at the lives of these people was there was one common theme, and that is that they were unhappy people, unfulfilled people, people who later in life died often in loneliness and in despair because they found nothing to really fill their soul. They filled their time. They kept themselves busy. They knew lots of people, but their soul never came to rest. And that is exactly what Solomon is talking about in the book of Ecclesiastes. Open up with me, if you will, to Ecclesiastes chapter 2 and beginning at verse 1. Now, in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, we saw that Solomon pursued life first and foremost intellectually. All of his pursuits were intellectual pursuits primarily. He wanted to research things. He wanted to understand things. He wanted to make sense of things. And his conclusion, having done all that research, was that it was futility. It would go back to the old adage, the more you know, the more you know that you don't know. I don't believe in the adage that says the more you know, the more you don't know. I mean, either you're learning wrong or something. I mean, if you learn something, you know more. But as you learn more, you realize there's more to know. I'm reminded of a friend of mine whom I've served on some boards with. He's a scientist who dialogued with Carl Sagan at the end of Carl Sagan's life. Carl Sagan, you remember, is the great astronomer and scientist of the skies, and this man dialogued in personal letters and conversations with Carl Sagan at the end of his life. And Sagan was in absolute despair because in all of his pursuits of knowledge, he never found a central unifying set of facts upon which he could rest his soul. Every bit of information led him to another question, and he was trying to find the source and the beginning of all life, but he wouldn't do it by acknowledging God or a supreme being. And in the final days of his life, as my friend wrote him about the gospel of Jesus Christ, Sagan just said, after all these years, I just can't accept it. I just can't accept it. And his soul went off into eternity frustrated because he found nothing upon which it could rest and find relief. Well, that was chapter 1 for Solomon. But in chapter 2, now he's going to set his mind aside a little bit, and he's going to try experience, and he's going to look to his flesh or to human experiences as an opportunity to somehow find happiness and to find fulfillment. And so he says in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 1, he says, I thought in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. Now, the word pleasure there means we could actually translate it to be a party animal or to be a party goer. But what he said to himself is, I'm going to go out and I'm going to have a great time. I'm going to party, I'm going to swing, I'm going to experiment, I'm going to feel, I'm going to live, I'm going to do it all to find out if there is anything good, if there is anything there upon which my soul can ultimately rest. But he tells us ahead of time, but that also proved to be meaningless. And now he'll give his examples. Verse 2, laughter, I said, is foolishness, or better translated, madness or craziness. And what does pleasure accomplish? Now, Kohelet's not talking, Solomon's not talking here about a sense of humor, because a sense of humor is a very, very helpful thing. He's talking about a kind of rabid folly, uncontrolled energy that is simply expended upon fun things, experimental things that are supposed to bring laughter or excitement to one's life. And he says that is absolute meaninglessness. Laughter or humor can be a good thing. For instance, when a person turns 40, all right? Now, we recently in our congregation had someone turn 40. And so we had a little humor, a little laughter, a little fun to kind of ease the pain. It was a very nice time. And that is very productive. We are told that humor and having a good sense of humor is valuable to life. We need to laugh at ourselves, and we certainly need to laugh at others, don't we? We don't want them to know that. We tell them, oh, I'm laughing with you, when in essence I'm laughing at you. But you have to have a sense of humor in life at times, with children and other such things. So Solomon's not talking about a sense of humor here. He's talking about a kind of extreme behavior that goes and throws so much energy just into the experimentation of what might bring thrill. I could probably call this thrill seekers. Verse 3, he says, I tried cheering myself with wine or alcohol, and at the same time embracing folly. In other words, would an altered state of alcohol influence somehow help me to embrace these events of folly and have greater joy or greater satisfaction? But at the same time, Solomon says, I'm not going to lose my mind on this. I'm going to use my mind still to guide me with wisdom. So I'm not going to get so blown out of my mind that I can't think. He's trying to measure his intake of alcohol or wine so that he could see how it would lighten his mood, how it could influence him positively. Could it help him through these times of folly, and yet not so much that he would, become the blubbering idiot that some do when alcohol totally takes over. I remember this last fall when I was on one of my hunting trips way up in Quebec. I was put in a trailer with some other men, and these men drank alcohol, which was fine with me. I make no judgments about those kinds of things. But we had somebody come and visit, a young man in his 30s, and the guys said to him, would you like a drink? And the guy says, no, I don't handle my liquor very well. And they wouldn't let it go at that. They then opened up a bottle and gave it to him and said, come on, you can have it, it's all right. Your wife's not here, your family's not here, you're all right. Go ahead and have some. And the guy says, no, I probably really shouldn't have any. I don't react very well to it. And these guys just wouldn't leave him alone. So then they poured it out for him and tried to make him drink it. They didn't like the fact that they didn't bother me because they knew that I was a pastor. So now, I don't know. Maybe if I'd have been a particular denomination, they might have been more. But, I was a pastor. I told them I didn't want to prefer, so on. So they're pushing this guy. Finally, the guy takes it, and he says, I just want you to know, when I drink alcohol, I get really ugly, and I want to fight. Do you still want me to drink this? Well, then they took it out of his hand. And that's where this guy was. When he partook of alcohol, he says, I just found in my early life that every time I got too much alcohol or I drank, I got real ugly and I wanted to fight with people. And I always ended up in a kind of a Donnybrook of a fight. So then the guys thought, well, you know what? Maybe not such a good idea for this guy, and then they left him alone. Well, you see, Solomon is trying to figure out how much is enough, but how much is too much, and all of those kinds of factors. As he is guiding his mind along and trying to evaluate, I wanted to see what was worthwhile for men to do under heaven during the few days of their lives. Now, I would be amiss if I didn't say something about the problems of alcohol in America. You know that I do not believe that all alcohol is wrong, that there is an appropriate and proper use medicinally for it at times. And I know of good people who do know how to handle it in a kind of a proper way. And I know that the Bible, in my opinion, nowhere says thou shalt not drink. The Bible speaks mostly about drunkenness. But one thing you do need to understand about alcoholic drinks from ancient Near Eastern history, when they took the wine and then they mixed it with water for daily usage, under most situations, you would have to blow your bladder before you would get drunk because it was so watered down. You'd blow your bladder before you'd blow your liver or your kidneys. Now, they did have special strong drink that a person used when they particularly wanted to inebriate themselves. But in America, it has become a great problem, and for that matter, across the world. Alcohol is a key factor in 68% of manslaughters, 62% of assaults, 54% of murders and attempted murders, 48% of robberies, and 44% of burglaries. In the case of attacks on women, alcohol plays a significant role in breaking down the thought processes and the inhibitions of a person in 42.2% of cases. 60% of men and 50% of women arrested for property crimes, burglary, larceny, and robbery, when voluntarily tested, were over the limit in the area of alcohol or other drugs. 64% of all reported cases of child abuse and neglect involve alcohol-related problems. So it is a large problem in our world here, particularly in America. Now, we recently saw an example of this after the Final Four of the Michigan State loss. You remember the scenes. Students were out there partying. They broke up furniture. They overturned cars. The alcohol was filling the street, so on and so forth. And it's unfortunate that this was considered kind of like a rite of passage. In fact, they had printed up T-shirts ahead of time. Remember reading that? They had prepared the kindling for the bonfires and had chosen their location and everything. Now, I thought to myself at that point that that was kind of an isolated incident. But about 3 weeks later, one of the 2020 or Datelines did a special on universities in America, and they picked out 6 universities from throughout the United States where there literally had been college riots because the administration had declared the campus to be a dry community. The statistics are that 40% of college students report binge drinking. Binge drinking is defined as 5 or more drinks at one sitting. That 40% of college students, at least once within a 2-week period, had committed binge drinking. 31% college women, 52% college men. All of that is to say this: we need to learn something from Solomon. Solomon says, I tested all that. I tried all that. I tried to find some enhancement to life through wine and through alcohol. And it ended up being meaninglessness, and in fact, it was foolishness, and it was folly. Alcohol has a place in our dietary American culture, but we better be very, very careful where it does fit in. It is not something to bring joy or happiness or rest to the soul. There are times when it has a medicinal factor, and we need, particularly for our young people who are bombarded by billions of dollars every year in advertising, we need to warn them that alcohol and drugs will only destroy your life. It will not bring rest or satisfaction to your soul. So that's almost a sermon in itself, isn't it? And but it is part of what we see in the text. Again, Solomon says, I tried cheering myself with wine. You know, doctors and psychologists that I read tell me that for the majority of people, for over 80% of the people, wine actually has the opposite effect. It actually brings more of a depression and a discouragement after that. So be warned from Solomon. It is not the way to go. Well, in verse 4, he tried some other things. He says, I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. Now, Solomon spent about a dozen years with thousands of workers building his own particular palace and home. And it was very opulent, and it was very, very beautiful. Now, he didn't only build a house for himself, but he had to build a house for all of the different wives. You know, Solomon had hundreds of wives for business and political alliances. Now, it's interesting, Solomon had his main home within the city limits of Jerusalem. But all of his other homes for his wives, he put outside the holy city on the hills round about Jerusalem. And he did not allow them to come into the city. But any time he was to spend with them, he would go out of the city to them, to the houses that he had built for them. But he knew about building. Solomon was a tremendous builder. He built 3 huge cities up and down the midland area of the land of Israel. He built these 3 cities, Gezer, Megiddo, and Hatzor, in 3 strategic areas along the trade routes in the middle of the bread baskets of Israel, so that when all the farmers collected their crops, they had a place to bring them for storage, so that he could control all of the trade along the trade routes. You were going to stay at his hotel or his motel. You were going to eat at his restaurants. You were going to get repairs at his repair shops. He had it all very well planned. I mean, he was a brilliant builder. The Solomonic temple, and then what was built upon that, the Herodian temple, have the largest stones that we know of in all of the world as their foundation. They are bigger than the stones of the pyramids. They have one stone on the bottom of the Solomonic temple that is 2 times as wide as this walkway, up to 8 feet high, and will extend from here all the way to the back wall. They don't know how they moved it. We couldn't move it today with all of our machinery and everything. I mean, these were brilliant builders. And Solomon, you know, he got into building. He thought, if I have something bigger and I have something better, I'm going to be satisfied and I'm going to be happy. So I undertook these great projects, and I built for myself these great projects, and I planted vineyards. You know, vineyards in ancient Near Eastern history were a source of fruit and raisins and wine and raisin cakes and all kinds of delicacies and fine products. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. These were the delicacies of the day. As people traveled from throughout the world to see Solomon, that was what they would bring, seeds and spices and those kinds of things. So he had his own horticultural museum, in a sense, there. And all of those things provided the delicacies for him. But these gardens and these parks also prepared for him a sense of air conditioning. In the land of Israel, it does get quite hot. But when you move from out of the sun into a garden-type area, it can drop 15 and 20 degrees alone because of the garden, and even more in feeling it because you are under the shade. So these were all places to kind of relax and hang out. Nowadays, it would be like, having a pool in the backyard with a jacuzzi, with a shaded awning, and the fans blowing down, and all just very, very nicely. Verse 6, I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. Now, in the land of Israel, it probably rains maybe 30 days or 45 days out of the year over a 3-month period. The rest of the time, you don't have any rain. You have a very, very heavy dew at times that helps provide moisture for the land. So if you're going to have all these vineyards, and you're going to have all of, I'll tell you, the vineyards, they are phenomenal. I mean, when we were living in Israel, we could go buy huge, what do they call a group of grapes, These huge groups of grapes for like $1. And they were just so juicy and so wonderful. And but if you're going to have that kind of fruit trees, you've got to have an irrigation system. So Solomon built for himself these reservoirs of water. Now we have uncovered, I say we, archaeologists, I like them to do the work and I'll take the pictures. That's a better system to me, But archaeologists have uncovered at least 3 of these pools. One pool was over 560 feet long, some 300 plus feet wide, and 32 feet deep. Now that's phenomenal. I mean, that's football stadiums and more that he had constructed and filled so that he could irrigate his gardens and his fruit trees and all the, I don't know if they had a water slide or the ancient Herodian water channel that goes all the way from Jerusalem down to Jericho, some 20 miles long, is kind of a water slide. I mean, I'm sure that you could get in there and float your way down on a good day, the whole 26 miles of the Herodian channel. So water was very important, and so they built these reservoirs in order to keep their flourishing trees going round year to year and around the year. Now, this is very common for human nature, isn't it? We all want, usually, a bigger home, a nicer home, a home with lots of flowers and plants, and, if we can have acreage, that's absolutely wonderful. And sometimes we like to have cottages, and there's nothing in and of itself wrong with that. The state of Michigan rules we are number 1 in second family homes or second homes of any state in the United States. Did you know that? We have more second homes per capita than any other state in the Union with our cottages and those kinds of things. Now, some people, they don't prefer to buy cottages. They buy these mobile homes that are on wheels, and that's okay too. But if you feel your happiness resides in that, then you're headed the wrong direction. And Solomon's, in and of himself, he's not saying these things are all wrong. What he is saying is if these things are the focus of what you think is right, of what you think is going to be satisfying, you're going to lose. You're going to be disappointed. You're going to be very distraught. So he made these reservoirs. Verse 7, I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. So he had acquired servants. This is better than employees. Well, maybe not. Employees go home and feed themselves. Servants you have to feed. Employees go home and have their own homes. You have to build homes for slaves. Employees will sue you, but slaves, slavery is probably better in ancient Near Eastern history. But he had male and female slaves and other slaves who were born in his household. So he had enough of them that they were there long enough that they were born in his house, and he had all kinds of servants. Now, I know, ladies, that it would be of help, wouldn't it? What lady here would not like to have somebody come in and clean the house every couple of hours after the kids have been through it. You know, I can appreciate that. I can appreciate that very much. This is a wonderful thing. But you know what? If we even had slaves and servants to clean our houses and to take care of all those things and to do all of that laundry that happens, you know, hour after hour after hour, only the Lord knows where that all comes from. You know? And all those dishes. So I think somebody's going to make $1 million someday when they build biodegradable, biodestructible dishes that are so affordable that you can use them one time, and then when dinner's over, they just self-destruct, you know? But, you know, even if we had all of that help, it's not going to bring satisfaction to the soul. All the possessions in the world are not going to bring satisfaction to the soul. He says, I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. Herds of goats provided all the cheeses and the milks and those kinds of products, which was part of their basic food chain. The flocks provided meat as well as the goats did, but they provided the wool and the warmth for the clothing and for the tents and for construction materials. And so to have herds and flocks was very, very important. Verse 8, I amassed silver and gold for myself. I mean, he had his certificates of deposit. He had his mutual funds, in a sense. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. Solomon had the opportunity to collect many things from around the world. I mean, artwork and sculptures probably, and special things that they had, and the horses of Egypt and the chariots. And he had all of this money, and all of his silverware, and that was, you know, of the finest value. I had all of that. I acquired it all. I acquired men and women singers. Now, this is for the young people. In those days, they did not have Bose speakers, all right? In fact, they didn't even have stereo. And if you can believe this, they didn't even have electronics. So probably some here today can remember when we only had mono, didn't even have stereo. Who's in that group? Who can, gosh, I can't imagine you admit your age like that. Whew. You know? But can you remember? Can you remember when we only had records? You know, and 33 and 45, and even when we didn't have, who can remember when we didn't have records? So we'll get you on the funeral schedule. So Bill's healthier than I am, so is probably Ethel. He'll probably be burying me. But you know, in those days, music was still a wonderful, wonderful thing to experience. People loved music, but the average person rarely had it. They couldn't afford instruments. But Solomon, he was able to buy male singers and female singers, and in all of that, he was able to have some of the most beautiful music, as exemplified by the Psalms and other books of the Bible. And so, I mean, he had Bose speakers and more in his day. And music is a tremendous, tremendous pursuit by many people. Many people just live by their music, not just teenagers. You know, I know when a teenager drives down the street in our neighborhood, I feel the house shake, you know, from the music and everything, and that's okay. But music, it's $1 billion industry, and people at times are trying to find solace and satisfaction in music alone, and it just doesn't last. I acquired men and women seekers, and a harem as well, the delights of the heart of man. Solomon thought that he could somehow find satisfaction and fulfillment in life in sexuality. in the freedom of sexuality, the unlimited exposure of sexuality. Now, Solomon had hundreds of wives and thousands of concubines, kept women. Now, what does that tell us? That tells us he never found satisfaction in numbers. But you know what? That's what we are bombarded with all the time. In commercials, on television, in the media, and in marketing. And our kids are particularly bombarded with it all the time. That pleasure and fulfillment in life comes through sexual experience. And it's one of the biggest lies of the American culture today. For fulfillment does not come in the quantity of partners, but in the quality of the relationship. And we need to preach that loud and clear. For the New Testament tells us that all other sins are outside the body, but this is a sin that just stings the soul. And Solomon says, you know what? I had them all. I had them all. I had the harem, the delights of the heart of a man, but he did not find satisfaction. And beloved, and young people in particular, fulfillment in life, the intimacy is in the quality and the commitment to a singular, monogamous relationship. And when we live in a world here in America where there are over 1 million people with AIDS right now, where 1 in 5 Americans have some kind of sexually transmitted disease, you are playing a dangerous roulette game when you give yourself to somebody outside of marriage. The same self-control that you need before marriage is the same self-control that you will need in marriage. And let us learn from Solomon. Quantity does not bring satisfaction. Well, in verse 9, he says, I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired, a kind of narcissistic, free-for-all lifestyle. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my work, and this was the reward of my labor. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done, and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless and chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Solomon says it was like trying to grab on to those bubbles that the children blew for us last week. When you grabbed onto it, it popped. It popped. Solomon says all of these pursuits have brought no meaning to life. It has all been chasing after the wind. Now, in balance, as we go through the rest of the book, Solomon is not going to say that these things in and of themselves are evil. I think we should always speak against sexual immorality and drunkenness and some of those things. What he's going to speak against is that these things, as the focus and the drive of one's life, does not bring satisfaction. And this is kind of just the list of it all. Solomon's basically saying a life of futility, party time, alcohol, big houses and cottages, vineyards and gardens, land and recreation, reservoirs and pools, servants, goats and sheep, capital wealth, music, sexual exploits, career accomplishments, narcissism, or a workaholic kind of mentality. The question that I have to ask myself, that Solomon wants us to ask ourselves this morning is, what are you pursuing? What is the focus of your life? What are you modeling for your own children? If these are the things that are driving you, then you're being driven the wrong way. I'm reminded of the words of John, who espouses the words of Jesus. when he says the essence of life is to love God, family, and neighbor. He says, do not love the world or anything in the world. If a person loves the world, that's all those things in Solomon, the love of the Father is not in that person. For everything in the world, the cravings of the flesh, the cravings of the eyes, and the pride of life, does not come from the Father, but from the world. The world and its desires are passing away, but the one who does the will of God lives forever. As we continue in the book of Ecclesiastes, we're going to find that life comes together and finds fulfillment in pursuing the Heavenly Father and in pursuing His will for our lives. And when we pursue the Heavenly Father through Jesus Christ for our lives, then we have the control to bring these things in proper order and in proper manner into our life so that they can bring fulfillment not just to us, but that they can bring fulfillment to the kingdom of God.